when I read that, I'm just boiling. My blood is boiling. I cannot endure that. To commit a crime as German, you cannot endure that someone like Hitler commit a crime. I cannot accept that his Communist Party commit such a crime in name of all Chinese. I don't want to say apologize to you, this and that, and you will tell us much more about what happened in Xinjiang. So I will just stop here because it's not a press conference, it's just a personal account. And we will, as Dr. Xie said, united we are strong. We will never give up. Well, the logic is not so simple, big and small, strong and weak. This is not like that. I think if we insist, we don't give up, we will at least survive. We will survive our culture, language, tradition, just as the Uyghur people continue to insist your language, your culture. Okay, Lowlands insist your language and your culture. So I will stop here. But before I give you the floor, Mr. Wei Jingshen waited already quite a long time there on screen. 魏金生，真是对不起，我们因为出了一些技术上的问题，我们没有马上开始，请你发言。现在对不起，现在请你发言好不好？你在吗？
在，我看到。
好的，请你发言好吗？魏金生先生 ，I think I don't have to introduce you who 魏金生 is. Everybody knows him, all right? 金生，请你发言。
好的，首先大家好啊！首先祝贺会议顺利召开，大家聚集在一堂议论我们共同关心的事情，是走向胜利的前提。现在西方主要国家反对共产党的浪潮正在上升，中共的内部矛盾也在上升。中共已经是个垂死挣扎的即将灭亡政权，大家多年的努力奋斗，很快就要看到结果。但是共产党并没有停止垂死的挣扎，在一些方面我们不得不提高警惕，正确的应对。共产党对西方的渗透和对反共力量的分化瓦解，是我们不得不警惕的方面。挑拨少数民族和汉族之间的关系，挑拨台湾人民和大陆人民的关系，挑拨各个反对派内部的矛盾。总之，共产党对所有反对派的统战工作，我们全可以掉以轻心。为什么共产党的统战工作屡屡得手？为什么共产党的统战工作屡屡得手？重要的原因是我们自己缺乏大局观念，把一些细小差别和矛盾看得很重要，把反对共产党的大局看得比较淡薄，这就造成反对派内部的分裂，各自为战，对共产党各个击破。这种危险时刻都存在。我们首先要明确，我们共同的敌人是共产党的一党专政，对全国人民的压迫和剥削，主要来自共产党，而不是其他民族和地区。共产党的存在是各族各地区人民的灾难。反正这个灾难主要来源，大家的共同愿望都不能实现。人与人之间的差别永远都存在，民族和地区之间的差别也永远都会存在。为了这些差别和矛盾就自相攻击，你死我活，这就是中共统战工作的成功，这就是中共特务渗透的主要任务。我们要把抵制挑拨离间和渗透当作我们的一项重要的工作来完成，否则我们自己的朋友四分五裂，被共产党特务所利用，伤害的就是我们共同的反共事业，也将使我们的人民大失所望。望大家深刻思考。我就说这么多。
谢谢这个魏金生先生跟我们说的 ，I just summarize very shortly. Hello. 可以听见吗 ？Can you hear? All right. Just very shortly summarize what Wei Jingshen has said. He said, well, this is the final struggle of declining power in China, and but the Western country and all of us should be alert about the infiltration through the Communist Party, and this Communist Party try to 奥散兰的那批赛会 division to separate or to destroy the relationship between the Chinese, the Taiwanese, and all the different nationalities. And we should be really alert that we should work together, and we will witness the decline of this evil power. Right? Now, Amber will do the next speaker, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I can only second Excellency Ambassador that the world, the democratic world, the democratic society, including civil societies, we all must keep together. All, I say, we must keep together. Be Xi Jinping in Beijing, be Putin in Moscow, they have their own plans and they don't have to respond to any electorate to be re-elected. They have their plans and they can survive as long as they want. And they, I think, closely watching what the world is doing and what the weakness of the rest of the democracies are, where our strengths are, and then, as I say, either Moscow or Beijing, they wait for a favorable atmosphere to implement their long-planned programs. We experienced with Russia in the last decade, beginning with Caucasia, Crimea, and this year with Ukraine. And now we are trying to formulate our response altogether. Whether a workable response is done there, I doubt. And again, back to China with Taiwan. Let's say right now we are talking about. I don't think also that the Western democracies have a joint common Taiwan policy. We must together, the governments, together with civil societies, NGOs, formulate a Taiwan policy. How to defend Taiwan democracy and freedom, and think about whether to forestall any forcible annexation of Taiwan to China. The democracies should recognize Taiwan diplomatically or not. As a citizen, my opinion is any Chinese leader, be it Xi Jinping or the next, one day would annex Taiwan by force. It could be this year, could be in 10 years. But if the world recognizes diplomatically Taiwan, and then they have to think again to attack, because it is a recognized internationally, then Taiwan is an internationally recognized country. That would be aggression and invasion of a country. So that's why I fully support what Ambassador said. We need a strong worldwide coalition in democracies if we are going to defend our values, our our freedom and our democracy, China must stop somewhere. And I think Taiwan policy, the West's Taiwan policy would be the test case to stop China somewhere. It is coming with the Belt and Road program. It is coming. It is already in Europe. Buying harbors in Europe up to 50%, 49% in different countries, and making obedient countries with investment. It is coming. So if we really think that we have to defend our democracies and we leave the world to our children, the freedom, then there should be a decision. Only a decisive action can stop China from aggression and from westward expansion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avi. I'm sorry that we have stolen 5 minutes from the next session, but we close now this session, and thank you so much. But before I
Without asking questions, isn't that a press conference?
okay, all right, please, yes.
Okay. Without
Jürgen
mic?
Kai is from NZZ.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, please.
I know that Ambassador Xie is quite busy and he has to leave soon. My question is addressed to him. Taiwan has been quite successful in getting, by diplomatic and not no diplomatic activities, has succeeded in raising attention and raising its profile. But I think the publicity Taiwan has got among the public is still, it could be done more. And I have two suggestions. As far as I know, about 8,500 Taiwanese are living in Germany. So, and I haven't heard them raise their voices. They could do it, I think, demonstrating in front of the Chinese embassy is fine, but it doesn't help because that's like speaking against a stone wall. You have to get the attention of the public and of political decision makers. And the second is, we all know that President Tsai Ing-wen is not a Taiwanese Zelensky. You are much closer to Melnik, the outgoing Ukraine ambassador. But she never has, as far as I know, given an interview to a European TV station or newspaper. I think it would be very helpful for her to raise her voice in Europe and show up again. So maybe when you go to Taiwan now, you can suggest to her that she's doing that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's a very important question, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have talked about the subject. We've talked about the subject quite a few times in the past. You are right. It is, as a matter of fact, Tsai Ing-wen, President Tsai, really, I think she has given only one interview to BBC long ago, and for the other medium, I think there's hadn't been once. Okay, I meet her this time when I'm back home in 2 days. I try to pass over this message. Secondly, I think There are around 8,000 Taiwanese people living here. Some of them are married. Some of them studied here. Some of them work here. And you're right again that there hasn't been a real demonstration organized by this 8,000 Taiwanese people. I think one of the reasons is there is no such kind of organizations. We have some organizations separated, divided in all over the world, but not one centralized organization. And in USA, there is much more movement in this case. Maybe if Xi Jinping tries to sway us again big enough, and I will stand up and call the people together with your support, and we will demonstrate in front of the embassy of the People's Republic of China. Until now, I have tried to avoid my presence joining the demonstration there because I'm still here, diplomat, and I do depend on the good friendships, not with the Chinese embassy, but with the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And for me, the time has not come yet. But as you have noticed, I try to take part on every actions, demonstrations, sitting demonstrations, whenever I'm invited to, and I do that, and I hope. Let's see what happens in the next future. Xi Jinping is going to, he won't take back his steps, and I think there will be chances enough where we can meet together again, maybe not only around the world, but also for the embassy of the Republic of China. Thank you very much.
But isn't there the European Federation of Taiwan Associations? I would expect them to attend this conference too.
From Brussels,
The European Federation of Taiwan Associations, you know, Fei-Pen-Fu or Fu-Pen-Fei, I don't know.
This is the European Federation of the Society of all the Taiwanese here.
Yeah.
But they have been working in the last years to get support for Taiwan, but I'm not sure if there has already been cooperation between your organizations and with Fu. If not, maybe we can get her into contact with her.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. I'm an Uyghur, the ambassador, and I'm coming from Uyghur grassroots movement in Germany for the last 30 years. But it's not your job to describe, but the Taiwanese in Germany, in Europe, needs grassroots movement. They need it. The society, German society, European society should see Taiwanese people defending their rights, their democracy, their freedom. Thank you.
You are right. I'm always very sad if we may put protest action in front of the Chinese embassy. I am quite the single Taiwanese, and I'm really upset. We need grassroots movement from the Taiwanese in Germany. I'm sorry that we taken so much time from you, Didi, because you moderate the next one, but you will gain 10 minutes from the next session because Ambassador Xie has to leave, so we have a vacancy for 10 minutes, and you can prolong your session till, well, shall we say, for 2:40. All right. So we close this session, and so we are done. Sorry.
他们好像是要合影。
Let's bring them some jobs. No, this was okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. For stealing you so much.
So I think 2 more minutes. Although we don't really, where are we? 2:30. Yes? 13:30. All right, so I think we just start, even though some people are missing. 13:46, right, 15 minutes late. Then mine would catch up. I would ask everyone to try and be concise. I think brevity is a virtue. 我们大家要就说话时候也要就是说短一点哈，那个就不要说太多了，要不然怎么时间就来不及啊，赶不上。谢谢，不好意思啊。So one thing I wanted to say is that I deeply admire Tianqi, who is not here right now, hopefully will come back soon, for her consistent, really extraordinary efforts over so many years. It's a huge privilege to me personally to be able to take part in these events every year. I do so gladly. And what I noticed some years ago was that she began to involve so many people from different ethnic groups of China. This was a deliberate change of direction, I believe, from the older, more traditional 1989 Tiananmen Square movement democracy generation, who were mostly Han Chinese, and a deliberate effort to reach out to the different ethnic groups in this really very varied country. And I thought it was extremely smart and really just a wonderful thing to do. So that's what we're going to do here today in our panel. On my far left, I'll just get my right page here. Okay, there you go. My far left is, of course, Amy Siu, fellow Hong Konger. Some of you heard her speak earlier. Kai Müller, with International Campaign for Tibet. Then we have Embassan Initiative. You'll know Ilam Tohti was the Uyghur academic who was arrested in China and has essentially disappeared from view, basically because he was involved in creating a very interesting website called Uyghur Viz.
Yes.
Fantastically interesting website. Actually, I was still a journalist in China when they started to publish it, and I remember looking at it and thinking, this is really interesting and this is different. And of course, not much afterwards, he was disappeared because he was doing something so valuable.
And of course, Reinhard Bütikofer is or should be with us virtually from a distance. You will know he's a Greens Member of Parliament in Brussels or in Europe. And I can't see him there, but hopefully he's coming. And Xi Hanliang, who spoke earlier, also a familiar face for the situation in Mongolia, near Mongolia. So without further ado, Amy, take it away.
Thank you very much, Judy, for the introduction, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here for a distinguished audience, not just in the room, but also online internationally. I thank you for your time. My name is Amy Sim. I am a representative of the association called Hong Kong in Deutschland. We are the first registered association for Hong Kongers in Germany. Today we have very limited time, and I just wanted to make a few highlights to let you know what's been happening in Hong Kong and why I'm here today, that there's a need for me to come here and speak as well. As you noticed, that I'm trying to stay away as much as possible from the hot seat. Yes. So you might notice that in the media, you don't hear so much about Hong Kong anymore. It's not just because there's a Ukraine war, and it's not just because there are storms and climate change issues, energy crisis. It's a lot to do with the fact that in Hong Kong, freedom of journalism, freedom of press has been very much suppressed. You can almost say it's almost gone, almost gone. As a Hong Konger living overseas, I cannot reliably find online or on printed paper, newspaper, objective, neutral news from Hong Kong anymore. That's how bad it is. So my job today is, with this gap, I hope to fill a bit of this gap and let you know what's been happening. Let me start by saying basic freedoms and human rights situation in Hong Kong continue to deteriorate. It was already bad in 2019 when everybody could see on the television about police brutality, for example. It actually got worse, even though we don't hear so much about it. And you will notice that just now I mentioned freedom, human rights. Usually you also use the word democracy in the same sentence, but I didn't, because democracy has basically gone altogether in Hong Kong, and I will talk about it briefly in a moment too. I will start by very briefly introducing the national security law in Hong Kong. Some of you might be familiar about it, but just in case not, it was imposed upon, not just introduced, but imposed upon Hong Kong in June 2020 without due process. The people in Hong Kong was not consulted. There was no discussion of any kind. Suddenly one day China says, hey, this is your law and you're going to abide by it. And from there on, the law itself is also, I would use the word ridiculous because there's no any other appropriate word. Under this law, anybody, Chinese citizen, Hong Kong citizen, or otherwise, can commit crime against this law in Hong Kong, in China, or anywhere in the world, at any time, right now, or in the past, and of course in the future, can be prosecuted. So this is like the law, the omnipotent law. With this law, you can prosecute anybody with any crime that you feel like, even though explicitly in the law it says it's mostly about treason, sedition, and incitement. Let me start by mentioning some recent arrests. We all know that lots of dissidents have been arrested, but the story goes deeper than that, or let's say sadder than that. Thank you very much to Benedict Rogers. He mentioned that Cardinal Zen was arrested. In fact, he is a Catholic cardinal, Joseph Zen, aged 90. This is a senior citizen, 90 years old, arrested this year in May. And why was he arrested? Because he was the one of the trustees in a fund called 612 Humanitarian Relief Fund. This fund provided medical and legal assistance to the people who are affected, who are dissidents, who suffered from police brutality and so on. So this is a very purely humanitarian fund, and the cardinal was arrested for that. And really ridiculous, I have to use this word again, what was the crime? The crime was that he was colluding with foreign forces. And he was arrested with 5 other trustees. In fact, he went to court just 4 days ago, and of course it's ongoing. We'll have to follow and see what happens. And just to mention a few other arrests made under this national security law, just to let you know the extent of the law and how ridiculous it really is. There were 3 gentlemen in Canada, 3 Hong Kongers. They wanted to start a Hong Kong shadow parliament. They have been declared fugitives, and they are now on a wanted list in July 2 months ago. last month in August, there is a Facebook group called Civil Servant Secrets. This is really an online group for gossips. You know, you're talking about which toilet in the government building doesn't work, that kind of gossip group on Facebook. The 3 administrators for this group They were arrested because there's potential that they're going to say something bad about the government because they're civil servants. Now, what's really sad about all these people who got arrested is that you would expect them to, go through a fair trial or a fair legal process. But these days, when you're arrested, you sit in jail waiting for your trial. Very often, these people wait 1 year or more. There are many cases where people are waiting for 2 years and still waiting for a trial with no announcement of when this trial will come. So being arrested right now in Hong Kong is a very bad idea. You basically expect to sit in jail forever. So now I turn a little bit away from this topic of arrest. I'd like to talk to you about surveillance. We see how China has massive surveillance in Tibet and in East Turkestan, and we see the trend coming to Hong Kong very quickly. And let me again give you some examples. Right now in Hong Kong, you need to have an app on your phone. It's called the Health Code app. And you need to have a green code on your app to enter a number of places, such as government buildings, food markets, hospitals, post offices, restaurants, shopping malls, cinemas, parks. Basically, everywhere you want to go, you need to have such an app. And when you beep it, you know what you're giving the government, your personal information and your position. This is how the Hong Kong government is tracking its population. And we also have national ID cards, very much like the German ID card here, except in this card there's also a chip that is capable of corresponding with remote devices. And we know that in the lampposts in Hong Kong, they have such communication devices, and which is why everybody or every reasonable person in Hong Kong will put their ID card in a little bit of a case that prevents such information from flowing. So this is a complete in English would be a complete coverage of the population anywhere in the city. They want to know where and when you are doing what. So this is surveillance coming very quickly and very already there. I want to talk now briefly about democracy or lack thereof. If I laugh, it's not because I take the situation lightly, because the situation is so absurd to the point of being hilarious. The only appropriate response is to laugh. So let me tell you what's so funny. So we, of course, have a chief executive in Hong Kong. In May this year, 2022, there was a quote-unquote election. Of course, it was not an election done by the general population, but rather a committee of 1,500 people elected this person. There were 8 candidates who wanted to be on the ballot, but were not allowed to, which is why on the ballot there was only 1 candidate. And of course, this candidate was elected with many, many votes. And so in Hong Kong, we say, oh, this is North Korea style. This is not South Korea style election. And if you noticed, all the reports in Western media, very conspicuously, the word election does not appear. People were reported it with being chosen, there was a selection process, but not the word elected because it was not an election. And last year in December, the Chinese Communist Party published a white paper. The title is called Hong Kong, Democratic Progress under the Framework of One Country, Two Systems. This book, or this piece of work, I call it even literature, it should win awards in the fictional department, focusing on political propaganda. It's just, things inside are just so hilarious. A 2-sentence summary is that in this book it says, the Chinese style of democracy is better than the Western style of democracy. And Hong Kong, having the Chinese style democracy implemented, is therefore having a full and successful implementation of the two system, one country policy. And because of that, Hong Kong has complete democracy and everybody is happy. It literally says all the citizens are happy. You can only laugh. You can only laugh at such a piece of writing. I mean, how can you flip black and white in such a total? If you're interested, tell me. I give you a link. You can have a read. It's hilarious. You can only read it as fiction and laugh about it. And I know my time is up. I want to only say very quick words that I tell my young daughter, crying generally does not solve problems. I can sit here forever and tell you about all the bad things and cry about it, but that does not solve problems. And so I have a few, let's say, action items or suggestions to the audience here and also around the world. My appeal to all of you, each of you, please keep your awareness up. I know we don't hear about that. We don't hear about Hong Kong in the news so much anymore, but please keep your awareness up because things do happen and things do get worse. Just very quickly, very good news. In Chinese, in Cantonese, we say, 自己香港自己救. That means it's our Hong Kong. We will fight for our own deliverance. And in that sense, I'm very glad to announce here that in Germany, we have last month just launched a second registered organization called Freiheit für Hong Kong, Freedom for Hong Kong. And David Nissel here is a colleague with me on this new organization. Ray Wong, the prominent dissident who got a political asylum here in Germany, is the chairperson. And our focus will be political advocacy. So expect us to make a lot of noise. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening.
Very interesting. I want to ask a really brief question of each panelist after you've spoken, and I do ask you to keep your comments short. What can foreign governments and organizations do to support Hong Kong now?
I have many ideas, but I say only one now. We're very concrete. Sanctions. Sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. If you look at the news just yesterday, our Foreign Minister Baerbock, she was asking not just Germany, but the European Union to call sanctions against Iran for the recent protests. And I'm asking myself, what are the differences between those protests and protests in Hong Kong? If you have the balls to have sanctions against Iran, do that for Hong Kong too. Thank you.
Yes. Right. All right. Next up, Embassan of the Untitled Initiative. Without further ado.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it was 8 years ago, on 23rd September 2014, that economist Ilham Tohti was sentenced in a closed 2-day short trial to life imprisonment. We commemorate this tragic moment in the life of a man who was peace-loving personality, obsessed with the fear that relations between the Han authorities and the Uyghur population would deteriorate dramatically. We have not heard from him in 8 years. We know that his wife has only been able to visit him once with their 2 children. She lived in Beijing in isolation, far away from where Ilham Tohti is in a solitary confinement in Urumqi against the Chinese law, if he is alive at all. In fact, it is difficult to say anything about the fate of Ilham Tohti, who was awarded the European Parliament's Sakharov Prize in 2019, and at least 10 other international human rights awards, thanks to the repeated efforts of many friends, former students, relatives, parliamentarians, scholars, and democracy activists like you. Actually, the Chinese government wanted to silence him behind the bars, but now he is much better known by the international community as a brave and courageous man who sacrificed everything for the freedom and rights of his people. Thus, Ilham Tohti has been 5 times a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize since 2018. The Chinese government lacks the imagination to come up with credible charges when it wants to get rid of personalities who seem to be potential leaders and have a strong charisma. Accusations vary from attempted state subversion, disturbance of public order, or so-called separatism, as the case with Ilham Tohti, though he abundantly rejected separatism and sought a reconciliation. His parting words before arrest were that the two people must learn to respect each other, coexist in peace, and not hate each other. In order to make the economic, social, and developmental issues confronting the Uyghurs known to the China's wider population and the world community, Ilham Tohti had established the Chinese language website UighurBiz.net in 2006 to foster dialogue and understanding between Uyghurs and Chinese. It was repeatedly hacked and shut down in 2014. A government list of prisoners leaked in December 2021 indicates that 6 of the 7 students of Ilham Tohti were sentenced in December 2014 to between 3.5 and 8 years in prison. Although they would have completed their sentences, it is unclear whether they have been released. According to Human Rights Watch, Chinese continued severe repression against Uyghur population raises serious concerns that the 7 students are still under some form of detention or movement of restrictions. The so-called Xinjiang police files list created in August 2015 contains the names, genders, ethnicities, dates of birth, ID numbers, addresses, crimes, sentencing dates, and other details of over 18,000 Uyghurs convicted of political and religious crimes. The anonymous source who said they are a Han Chinese who is opposed to the Chinese government's policies in Xinjiang emailed this list of 18,000 prisoners and other 10,000 Uyghur prisoners to the Xinjiang victims database in December 2021. Many years have gone by and the situation in Uyghur region has gone from bad to worse. Millions of Uyghurs and members of other Turkic people have been sent to so-called re-education camps where they have been brainwashed, forced to deny their ethnic and cultural identity, separated from their families, in many cases tortured, raped, or even beaten to death. It looks as if the Chinese government getting ready in 2014 to launch a big campaign to destroy the Uyghur people, their way of life, language, and aspirations completely, had first targeted Ilham Tohti, the very person who was trying to prevent the tragedy. We have only been able to witness helplessly from afar now. The man whom the Chinese intellectuals describe as the Mandela of Uyghurs, and Deng Xiaoping, at the day of his unjust verdict, has described he does not belong to prison but deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. The Chinese state targeting of Uyghur intellectuals and cultural elites centers on their role in expressing distinct identity and culture. Those learned and creative intellectuals are carriers of Uyghur cultural memory. As researchers and innovators, they also represent the diversity of Uyghur intellectual and artistic currents. The persecution of elites deprives Uyghurs of the right to define themselves, and is nothing less than a form of eliticide that effectively destroy any hope of collective resistance to the Chinese government's campaign to ideologically sinicize Uyghurs. The Uyghur eliticide is a key tool to control or perhaps altogether annihilate Uyghur identity. Those detained in the camps have effectively disappeared, as they are not allowed to contact with anyone outside the camps and have no access to judicial or legal remedies. They were not provided with a warrant or given a trial before their forced detention. No formal charges have been levied against any of them, and they are being held for unspecified periods of time. The camps therefore constitute one of the largest cases of state-sponsored enforced disappearances and arbitrary detention in the modern human history. We now strongly request the members of the European Parliament not to forget Ilham Tohti. He did get his few minutes of fame in December 2019 when the public applauded the Sakharov Prize Committee for awarding this great honor to Mr. Ilham Tohti. Now, the Chinese government must give us answers to all these questions that surrounded the existence of Ilham Tohti. Is he alive? Where has he been thrown in jail? What is his health situation? Members of the European delegation in Beijing must repeatedly try to visit Ilham Tohti in Urumqi and take care of his family in Beijing. And they must convey some information about him to all of his supporters and friends. We call again on the Chinese authorities to immediately and unconditionally release Ilham Tohti and his students and stop crimes against humanity being committed against the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples. Thank you for your attention. I think I am on time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being so eloquent. I think I have a question for you as well.
Please.
How do you, given this really appalling story, Ilham Tohti has essentially disappeared, and although there's a lot of attention on Uyghurs in some ways nowadays, Ilham Tohti himself gets less attention, as you said. It's a strange situation for such a prominent and interesting person to have ended up in, I suppose. And my question to you then is, how do you view the issue of how the UN, the United Nations, managed to address the Uyghur issue? Are you aware if it specifically picked up on Ilham Tohti related his situation? Do you feel they could have done more? How did you view that report? And what do you think? The new United Nations Human Rights Commissioner has come in. We hear some criticism of him, to be honest. Volker Turk, he's from Austria, I believe. How do you view the UN's approach to
The Uyghur
issue and Ilham Tohti?
Thank you. Very valid and important question. Of course, it was 2 decades ago because of 1 or 2 bombings in Kunlun in Beijing. China tried to make us terrorists and somehow convinced the United States to include one actually physically non-existent organization to include to the International Terrorist Organization. It was put to the UN terrorist list. Exactly in these times, the message of Ilham Tohti and his relations with the EU in Beijing, both in Beijing, and he traveled, I think, a couple of times to Europe and met people in Strasbourg, in Paris, in Brussels, the members of the European Parliament, and it played a big role that the European Union and also the United Nations took up the issue or looked seriously to the Uyghur problem, whether it was a matter of terrorism, as China claimed, or it was a matter of grave human rights violations. So both. And the report, to be short, the report, of course, everyone knows China tried to not to be published. And it made me personally sometimes suspicious. Just before, a week or 2 weeks ahead of the release, Ms. Bachelet said she was receiving good information from China. At least China modified it. But still, openly it was afterwards, that is against. China is against it. On the other hand, I would say this is the first step that the international body, the UN, has a paper, a report there, which is prepared by its own reporters. And now we are expecting from the world community, they have to base, although sometimes we criticize some points, that they should move based on this report. They have to do something that should be consequent, and the criminals, I say criminals, should be taken into responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a report, there's things we can do about it, and the world community needs to act on the basis of that report.
Exactly.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Reinhard Bütikofer. Herr Bütikofer, are you there? Yeah, I see you. Yeah, hören Sie mich? Hallo?
Today I'm here,
Wonderful.
or rather, I'm in Frankfurt in eastern Germany, Thuringia.
Okay, so Gruß aus Thüringen, or nach Thüringen, besser gesagt, from everyone here. Herr Bütikofer, I think, needs no introduction. He's done more in the European Parliament than pretty much anyone to raise issues to do with China and Taiwan. So in the interest of time, we are quite tight on time. Herr Bütikofer, I just ask you to speak. Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for including me in this lineup. I think it's well worth reflecting on what the upcoming 20th Party Conference of the Chinese Communist Party will stand for. And I do believe that 3 results of that meeting are pretty much a foregone conclusion. 1, Xi Jinping, China's Communist Party emperor, will continue centralizing absolutely all political power that he can get his whole hand on. 2nd, the totalitarian claim that the Chinese Communist Party leads, as they say, everything in China, that they control every aspect of China's political, economic, cultural, religious, and academic and private life, will also be enhanced. And 3rd, the aggressive foreign policy that Xi has developed over the last 10 years, more aggressive than that by his predecessors, with land grabbing in the South China Sea, with the border conflict with India, with aggression against Japan over the Senkaku Islands, with aggressive behavior, in particular against Taiwan, with coercive policies against, for instance, Australia, Lithuania, or Sweden. All that will continue. In Europe's public, Xi Jinping's tenure has had an impact. 10 years ago, many Europeans still have a relatively positive image of the People's Republic of China. Just 1 or 2 days ago, Pew, an international polling organization, published new figures, and those figures show that all around Europe, that has been inverted. Now there are very few people in all of the European countries, with very few exceptions, like Hungary, very few people that have any trust at all in the PRC, and many people that really see China, Xi Jinping's China, as a risk, or I should say, a threat. And that is also expressed in NATO's new strategy that they accepted and agreed upon in Madrid a couple of weeks ago. The major factors that motivated this change of mind have been Hong Kong, Xinjiang, about which we just heard, and also Taiwan. I'm not saying that everybody around Europe is singing from the same hymn sheet. There are business leaders, not all, but some business leaders from some multinationals that still would want to continue just doing business and ignoring human rights and ignoring politics. But even in the business community, there is an increasing number of actors that realize, and the president of Germany's Federation of Industry has said so, that there are red lines, that there are ethical lines that have to be drawn also when German investors are active in China. The European Parliament has been playing a very active role in that regard, and we have indeed also highlighted the fate of Ilham Tohti by awarding him our Sakharov Prize in 2019. And we continue also mentioning him in our resolutions that we pass. But I would say it's also encouraging that we are not alone as a European Parliament. There is a broader rethinking among member states and in the Commission. That rethinking is basically focusing on the fact that, as was declared in the Strategic Outlook of March 2019, China is indeed a systemic rival for the EU. And when we look at the developments more recently, over recent years, we can only conclude that we are deeply in rivalry territory. That assessment has been bolstered also by persistent revelations about China's human rights atrocities in Xinjiang in particular, but also in other parts of the country. And I would applaud the former High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights, Mrs. Bachelet, that she finally, against very tough Chinese pressure, dared to publish a report which mentioned that there are crimes against humanity being committed in China, in particular in Xinjiang. Now I think it would be a common task for the international community to make sure that these issues will be tabled in the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations, and that China's efforts to smother such a debate will be futile. I also believe that we should impose new sanctions on those that perpetrate these crimes against humanity. And I believe, and this is a more general point, and I conclude with this, that there is a responsibility to let leaders in Beijing, to let the leaders of the CCP know very clear, in no uncertain terms, that we will do whatever we can effectively contribute to push back against their domestically extremely oppressive and internationally extremely aggressive agenda. And in particular, when they pursue a course of aggression against Taiwan, we have to impress on them that this would not be tolerated. It would come with a very high cost for the PRC itself. So I believe that there still might be here and there, wherever it's possible, opportunities for dialogue. But dialogue without clear deterrence will never work. And we need to develop a policy of deterrence also vis-a-vis a course of aggression and adventurism. And the fact that the leaders in Beijing and Xi Jinping himself struck the deal of unlimited friendship with the aggressor against Ukraine, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, underscores what I have in mind. This must not be tolerated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear words, which I think have been listened to extremely carefully in this room and also with many people watching online. Herr Bütikow, my question to you is, you use this interesting phrase, we are deeply in rivalrous territory with China. I think that's a very interesting phrase. And my question is, with what happened with Russia, the gas disaster that Germany is experiencing in its relations with Russia, how are we actually going to extricate ourselves or safely, and I really emphasize the word safe, safely for ourselves, for democracies, manage the economic dependencies that we have with China? How are we actually going to do this now? And I realize it's a big question, but I think it's a pressing question. I'd love to hear just maybe two or 3 minutes from you about how to do that, or what you think this is even about, how we could even begin to address the issue.
Thank you. That's indeed the core issue. Let me start by making one point that I feel is not made often enough. The CCP has been pretty successful with its propaganda that it will be successful historically regardless. Too many people have bought the narrative that many other actors, including in Europe, only have one choice, whether they will acknowledge Chinese demands today or whether they will have to acknowledge and have to accept Chinese demands tomorrow. There is this narrative of an unresistible rise of China, and this claim by Xi Jinping that China will move to the center of international relations. I don't buy that propaganda. And it has been used by some to make shallow excuses for not trying to rid ourselves of the dependencies that we have allowed to develop. And that's why I also oppose this. I think we should indeed learn our lesson from what has happened on the basis of our fossil fuel dependency towards Russia. Our dependencies vis-à-vis China are much broader, go much deeper, are much more risky, and we cannot forget the lesson that Putin's aggressive behavior told us. Some people say we cannot take on China as long as we still have this Russian aggression on our hands. I think the opposite is true. These totalitarian dictators, Putin and Xi Jinping, are like Siamese twins, joined at the hip. If we allow one of them to succeed, that strengthens also the other. That is one theater, and we have to form an alliance of like-minded countries, and I think there are many countries that have understood that the kind of world order that Xi Jinping and Putin are pursuing would deny agency to smaller countries, to less powerful countries. And that's why they certainly do not have an interest in falling victim to that. In order to be able to move, we have ourselves to reduce the dependencies, and that means redirecting our supply chains, redirecting our technological policies, avoiding the practice that has often enough, unfortunately, been the case, that we feed into even the technological development of the PLA because we don't take care of their efforts to exploit our academic research, for instance. I believe that increasingly there is a consensus between the human rights community and the national security community and big parts of the economic, the business community, that we have to wean ourselves of the Chinese dependency. This is not going to happen in one day. You cannot turn around on a heel, but you have to develop a strategy for that, and that has to be an all-of-society effort. And in that context, we also have to call out those people that are the stooges of Beijing, those people that play on behalf of Beijing, like some former ministers from different parties. I'm not naming the names here, but you know who I have in sight. And I believe this is a very fundamental challenge. And what our foreign minister has been demonstrating, and I'm very grateful for that, is that a policy that would be adequate to the challenge cannot play our values against our interests. Our values are part of our interests. Defending the democratic values, the human rights, the rule of law, that is also part of our interest in that systemic competition, and everybody has to play along. I recently heard somebody from industry who was asked, how would industry want to see China relations develop? And the man answered, I'm not answering the question, because the real question is, how will industry have to respond to the challenges by democratic society in countering Chinese policy? And I think he was right.
Thank you very much indeed, Henry Korfer, and for making the time to join us today. Our next speaker, because our time is pressing, Kai Müller from the Tibetan Initiative.
No,
International Campaign for Tibet. I'm so sorry. Too many fascinating groups here on the podium with me. I think one thing that's happened with Tibet issues, as a lot of attention has been on Uyghur issues, has been a slight drop off in focus. I wonder, I'm very pleased that you're able to, with ICT, to bring that back into focus for us here today. So please.
Yeah, thank you, Didi. Just a word about myself, my organization. The International Campaign for Tibet works since 1988 towards freedom and democracy in Tibet. We are basically an organization of Tibetans and Westerners. I happen to be a Westerner today, but I would like to relay also, I think, the appreciation of my Tibetan colleagues for your solidarity of our Chinese, Taiwanese, Uyghur, and Mongolian friends, and of course from Hong Kong as well. So this is really important. I think it stresses also one very significant factor here, is the one of interdependence. So what has been happening in Tibet has shown elsewhere. What has been happening in southern Mongolia has shown elsewhere. What is now happening in Hong Kong has shown elsewhere. So it is really crucial for a wholesome perspective on the CCP policies to not just focus on one issue, but to understand the whole package. And I think that is one lesson learned that needs to be learned from my perspective from the past, because if we look at Tibet, I mean, you all recall the 2008 pre-Olympic protests that happened countrywide in Tibet that were clamped down, followed by a row of self-immolations of around about more than 150 Tibetans. And what was the reaction of the international community? There were indeed a number of parliamentarians, governments, and also the UN, then High Commissioner, speaking out on the self-immolations, but no concrete action was followed up on it by government. So I think that was a grave mistake, because it allowed the Chinese government to test the waters. I mean, it was sort of, if you will, not just an attempt to what they call pacify Tibet and the resistance there, but also to test out new strategies, because I think they understood that by 2008, the strategies they had applied to Tibet at the time were not working. So they had to come up with something new. And that was Chen Guangguo, amongst others, but predominantly the TAR, so-called Tibet Autonomous Region Party Secretary, who later, after 2016, moved on to East Turkestan. So what did he do? He applied a number of repressive measures, for example, like installing convenient police stations every 100, 150 meters from each other in distance in urban centers. He tried out technological surveillance for the first time, and so forth. And he developed really a proactive approach to repression, which we then saw in East Turkestan, because it was no longer sufficient for them apparently to react to acts of protest and dissidence, but they then went proactively to the individual Tibetan household. It virtually was the case. They sent party cadres to the countryside in Tibet to knock on doors, to look what is the portrait of the four great leaders, not hanging up on the wall, and not the Dalai Lama or somebody else. So this, and I must know, Chen Guangguo never got on the sanctuary list. He never got there. I mean, he's now out in Xinjiang as well. He's Turkestan, but he never got on that list. So, and what he did in East Turkestan was to further develop the technological surveillance. And it comes back now. We've heard about the DNA collection, a massive DNA collection going on in Tibet now, as reported by Human Rights Watch and Canadian Citizen Lab and others. Jumping to the next interdependence, relocation of nomads and Tibetans. talk to our southern Mongolian friends, what has happened in Mongolia. And it is so reminiscent of what has been going on in Tibet these days or over the past 20 years. So that means enforced settlement of nomads, destruction of an autonomous, self-determined lifestyle without alternative, and bringing them into a market economy structure. Third, Dalai Lama succession, appointment of clergy. Look at the Catholic Church. It's the same game you play. The underground churches, unfortunately, the Vatican has agreed to make a somewhat deal with the CCP, which doesn't work out for the Catholics, as far as we know. We are very concerned that if the next Dalai Lama is being picked by the CCP against the rights of the religious rights of the Tibetans, that this will cause conflict in Tibet. We ask for governments to raise the stakes with the CCP in order to prevent conflict as a measure of conflict prevention. Fourth, Taiwan and Tibet, the status issue. Why is it that whenever the German government talks about the Dalai Lama, they have to, as a reflex, state that they consider Tibet as a part of China, as they have done in 2020 to a totally unrelated question on the dialogue? Why is that so? This should make you think, everybody who works on Taiwan. You have to be mindful. All of this, as we have monitored over the past years, happened vis-a-vis a strange sort of, I would say, delusionary, self-delusionary foreign policy here in Germany and perhaps beyond. One of which is compartmentalization. So the attempt to take one issue, human rights, to have it deal with one policy structure, with one ministry. Trade, another ministry. Strategic interest, another ministry. Health, another ministry. So this has led effectively to a sanitization of issues that were unpleasant to talk about, where they feared it may hamper progress in other areas. And climate change, I mean, look at Pelosi and her Taiwan visit. What did they announce? We want to halt the climate talks with the US. So it's also becoming a subject of trade-offs, right? And that's not right. Contrary, what we would like to see is a perception, first, and understanding of the interdependence of all those developments, including in Tibet, which has gotten less attention over the past years, and unjustly so, I would say, given just what I talked about, that all of this is a part of an understanding of national security, of European security. I think the US is much further in their thinking of China. They are seeing the consequences. They are understanding the consequence of what is happening inside the PRC with regard to their position on China and how China acts on them. So this needs to be really changing. And yes, the stakes must be raised. We are calling for sanctions as well, calling for sanctions for those CCP officials who are responsible and accountable for the implementation of policies in Tibet. And we want language. We want clear position from the German government on the succession of the Dalai Lama. It has been half-baked, and it must be understood that the German government has a responsibility to contribute to conflict prevention on Tibet. It's not enough. If it happens, the Chinese bulldozer through the religious rights of the Tibetans and denounce the Dalai Lama without much ado, it will have dire consequences. So the stakes must be raised. And one last thing, we're always asking for governments to do things for the Tibetans. It should be in their self-interest. That being said, but Tibetans have something to offer. They are partners in values. let's understand that the Tibetan government in exile tries hard to establish a democratic structure in exile in southern India. And the same, the civil society commitment from the Uyghurs, from the Hong Kongers, from the Taiwanese, it must be acknowledged as partners and valued as Wertepartner for us here in Europe in an increasingly autocratic world. We need to really change this perception on these stakeholders in the world. And I close with that.
Do you want to change the message? I think in the interest of time, I'll just speak them without the microphone. Thank you very much, Kai. In other words, Tibet as part of the solution for Europe, for America, in dealing with China and dealing with autocracy, which is of course the argument that people make in Taiwan as well, and how much they have to offer experience of China, really granular, close knowledge of that system, of the culture, of people, inside knowledge, and we're not making enough use of it, as you said. How do you concretely, how can we do more? How can the German government do more?
Well, they should support initiatives on the UN level where something is at stake. They must invest political capital. And political capital is cannot be reduced to statements. Statements are necessary. I'm not saying they are unimportant. They are important, but we are beyond the stage of statements. We are definitely. And the EU has taken the right step to issue sanctions on those 4 individuals and 1 institution, I believe, in Xinjiang, in East Turkestan. That was the right step. But it was also a very modest step, I would say. And now with regard to, just if we talk about the report by Ms. Bachelet, I would say it is also in the interest of all of us that there are consequences being taken first at the Human Rights Council, at the United Nations, that institutionalize a monitoring of CCP policies towards the Uyghurs, but also towards the Tibetans, the Hong Kongers, and the Chinese human rights defenders. Let's not forget about that. So much the German government can stick their head out for.
Thank you. I know I'm running over time and I apologize. It's been such a fascinating panel, so please bear with me. I do have one final small question for you. It's a big topic, but maybe you have a few words to say. We've seen the issues on the border with India. Now, the 5 miles, 5 finger policy, pushing south from the Tibetan plateau. Why do you think this is happening? What have you had thoughts about this? Is there any discussion about this among Tibetan thinkers, thought leaders, political leaders?
I would say that's really a tough issue because the Tibetans in India have a distinct interest in this situation, and I think what Tibetans are talking about in this context is not so much the concrete developments. This is of interest as well, but about the solution to this aggressive foreign policy. And if one goes back to the 80s, we may come across the Dalai Lama's 5-point peace statement, a proposal from Strasbourg at the time where he said, okay, let's demilitarize Tibet, right? So that there's a zone of peace. He called it ahimsa in India, a zone of peace, right? So I think there's also a geostrategic component to what is going on in Tibet. If Tibet were truly pacified in terms of the respect of the rights of the people, I'm very certain this would also reflect on how the situation at the borders are, how the Chinese foreign policy would express itself towards India, Bhutan, Nepal, all of those neighboring countries. So I think there's a larger picture to be considered.
Thank you very, very much. I think we need to move on swiftly now. Last but not least, Xi Haiming.
Yeah.
Thank you very much again. And you too for to speak about Mongolia. In Mongolia.
Guten Tag, ich danke euch hier über innere Mongolei-Kurs berichtet zu werden. Ich danke dir. Weil innere Mongolei, Südmongolei, wurde in eine Ecke gestellt von internationaler Gesellschaft vergessen wird. Deswegen, ich bitte um Entschuldigung, weil wir haben eigene Arbeit nicht gut organisiert. Deswegen diese passiert. Dann, wir möchten nicht von internationaler Gesellschaft vergessen. Ein Volk, zum Beispiel meine Vorfahren, ja, Kirgisistan West, alle weiß das. Aber wir jetzt in einer Situation, unsere Volk Überlebensproblem. Aber Welt hat nicht gesehen, unsere Welt. Und ich kann nur einmal, weil ich rede immer diese Zeitproblem, ja, 8 Minuten, manchmal mehr geredet. Ich möchte eine Kulturrevolution, diese 1968, die chinesische Militär, General Deng Haixin, hatte diese 69 militärische Einheiten in Inneren Mongolei, hatte Mongolen militärische diese Notfall oder Not gestellt. Und dann die Mongolen ist fast 100.000 Mongolen getötet. Und viele in Lager gestellt. Meine Mutter war in Lager, mein Großvater war in Lager getötet. Das passiert fast in jeder Familie. Das wird hier bis jetzt, aber jemanden hat geschrieben, aber weltweit, ich glaube nicht wieder. Außerdem, unsere Bodenschaft wurde geraubt. Unsere Natursystem wurde zerstört. Deswegen gibt es diese Schadenbau. Ich weiß nicht auf Deutsch, wie sagt man diese Problem. Der ganze Welt ist auch eine Zerstörung von China. Wir gegen diese chinesische Kolonialismus. Wir möchten in eigenem Land als Hausherren bleiben. Aber jetzt nicht mehr. Jetzt die Chinesen wie ein Hochwasser. Bei uns ist das 20 Millionen Chinesen da. 1981. Wir meinen, diese ist zu. Für unser Weiterleben ist das schwer. Und dann, wir haben eine Studentenbewegung organisiert. Ganze Studenten teilgenommen. Aber trotzdem bleibt China ruhig gestellt. Damals bei uns, wir haben in diese Hauptstadt von Inneren Mongolei, Südmongolei. Und dann, wir haben überall diese Demo organisiert. Aber damals in Hochhaupt keine einzige Journalist von Ausland. Aber die chinesischen Journalisten sagten alle okay, alle gut. Ich weiß nicht, als eine wenige Leute, was sollen wir machen? Wir bitten um Hilfe, um Welt zuschauen, was in Südmongolei passiert. Von 2020, die China hatte mongolische Kinder in der Schule, mongolische Lernen verboten, gesetzlich. Damals gibt es Bewegung gegen diese, aber viele Leute, über 5000 Leute wurden verhaftet, aber manche nachher unterschreiben, dann nach Hause gelassen. Und hatte letzten Jahre hatte unsere Kindergarten, die mongolisch aufgehört. Und sogar in diesen Jahren passiert was, jene Schilingol, mongolische Schule, diese Bücher, mongolische Bücher von Bibliothek, alle rausgebrannt. Was ich weiß, in China vor 2000 gibt es Qin Shi Huang, hatte diese Bücher verbrannt. Und letzten 130 Jahre in Deutschland hat wird also diese Bücher verbrannt. Aber in heute, 21.000 Jahre, in mongolische Bücher verbrannt, wir dürfen nicht in Schule Mongolisch lernen. Was ist unsere Welt? Das ist China ist Grausam. Das ist der grausamste Kolonie her in Südmongolei, auch in Tibet, auch in Osttürkei. Deswegen, wir bitten unsere Welt, gucken oder schenken eine Aufmerksamkeit für uns. Unsere Probleme wurde von Welt. Dann ist vielleicht für unsere Situation geht besser. Ich bin diese Jahre 66 Jahre alt. Ich bin schon diese Jahre Rente geworden. Wie lange leben ich weiß nicht. Aber ich muss wieder Ende kämpfen. Wenn ich irgendwo da, ich bin in der Zeit ist ein bisschen mehr geworden. Ich möchte alle die südmongolische Probleme nicht vergessen, um unsere Situation zu verbessern. Ich danke euch.
Vielen Dank, Herr Sie. Sie haben ja hier eine Frage für Sie auch, natürlich. Wir haben gehört von Versuchen, also dass man sich zusammenstellt und versucht zu organisieren. Wie sieht es bei, jetzt bin ich natürlich zu ignorant in diese Frage und können Sie uns erklären, wie ist es organisiert mit der in mongolische Leute wie Sie, dass Sie in der Welt, dass Sie sich zusammenstellen? Haben Sie da eine Organisation weltweit? Oder wie viele verschiedene gibt es hier und da und überall? Können Sie das etwas erklären?
Ja. Als ich rauskam, wir haben 97 in den USA eine innere mongolische Volkspartei organisiert in New Jersey. Und wir sind, bei uns ist die Menschenrechte. Bei uns nicht nur Menschenrechte-Problem, auch ein Volksrecht. Wir sind als eine Nation jetzt untergestellt auf schwedische, diese grausame, und außerdem, wir haben, ich habe diese Organisation, organisiert. Und 2016, wir haben in Japan, südmongolische Weltkongress, diese uigurische Weltkongress, wir haben auch organisiert. Und 2018, ich habe auch in Japan die Free Asien, Free Inter organisiert von Japan, Tibet, Taiwan und Südmongolei. Ich bin auch als Organisator, als Vizepräsident dieser Organisation. Diese innere Mongolei ist die Vorsitzende. In Weltkonferenz von Südmongolei, ich bin auch Vorsitzender. Meine Lieben, ich habe schon über 40 Jahre gekämpft. Ich kämpfe weiter. Ich bitte um eine Hilfe, unsere Probleme in der Welt aufmerksam schenken wird. Danke sehr.
Okay, vielen Dank. Ja, viel zu überlegen. Was kann man noch sagen? Ich sage nichts mehr. Herzlichen Dank, außer herzlichen Dank an ihn auch. Und Tinti, zurück an die Chefin.
Okay, your session is closed now. We have
在我的上我的眼中，一口二战得一
你刚才好像10多时间全都下来了，一口二战得一
我前面有2个。
All right, we have another about 40 minutes, and then we will have coffee break. And if you cannot wait that long, you can stand up and grab a coffee. And but I think we have to continue now. Our next session, we will discuss quite different things. It's not quite the topic, the outlook for a peaceful existence. But anyway, our first speaker will be Didi. Yes, she is a scholar, she is a journalist, and well, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit, that's much better. Okay.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you, Tianqi. You missed earlier when I was moderating. I had a big, enormous round of praise for you because of your incredible efforts organizing this event every year. You were, I think, busy off stage organizing something else to do with it. So you missed the comments. I wanted to repeat them. Thank you. It's really extraordinary. And just to move swiftly on because time is tight, and I also don't want to speak for too long. I am a journalist, have been for 20 plus years. The last few years after leaving China, I moved to Berlin and I moved to think tanks in order really to deepen research, to get away from the daily pressure of journalism. I'm now back in journalism and using some of that knowledge to do more deeper investigative reporting. And I think to my personal background, I'm from Hong Kong. I was born and raised there. And I have lived 39 years of my life in some part of China, so 4 decades, and I'm now in Berlin. I think the topic of today is, I chose a slightly provocative title. I'll read it out if I can find it. Yeah, we're infiltrated, and it's not red under the beds panic, but it's real and it matters. Now, why did I use this Cold War phrase that people associate with America, reds under the beds? It's a silly phrase in a way. Why did I pick it? When I went back to journalism, I heard this quite a lot from editors. Okay, you're doing China, we don't want to have reds under the beds style journalism. You know, we don't want that kind of panic and prejudice, which I fully understand and completely support. We don't. However, we do need to look very, very carefully at what the Communist Party of China is doing in our midst. And we haven't done that. In Europe, in America, in Canada, in Australia, in Africa, in the Middle East, everywhere, South America, we haven't done that ever. Really, in human history, we have never done that. Not just the Communist Party, but any Chinese polity, any Chinese political system, what is it doing in our midst? We have never done that. So we really, really need to do it. And we need to be very clear that the system we are dealing with, facing, is essentially, it's a Leninist system. It hasn't changed virtually at all since 1949. Those who say it has, I don't think that's accurate. I think it's changed in structure in some places, for sure, but the essence of it, the fundamental ideas, the methods, the doing of it, the action, this sort of the sort of action that lies behind the system, this idea of constantly moving political campaigns and activities. Things can never stop and settle and grow organically. They have to be constantly forced, pushed, managed. Yeah, that's a very real thing. And I think that what we're dealing with now, when we have to manage in our midst, not just Chinese business interests and what we need from that or what we take from that, but also Chinese political interests, increasingly what we need to do is face the reality of something called transnational repression. This is no news to many people in the room. You're familiar with it. I'm familiar with it too. A very brief story. I was visited by a friend from China about 2 years ago. This person came and admitted to me that they had worked with the Ministry of State Security on various things in order to be able to do their other job in China, which involved contact with non-Chinese, and in my case, a journalist. And they came here and, this person had been a contact of mine, almost a friend, if you like. And I was being given a message. And the message I had was, in China today, you can talk about most things. You can have this conversation in society, or you can criticize maybe this aspect of something, perhaps something to do with the school or something like this. The one thing you can't do, and she sort of looked at me, what you can't do is, and I said, wait, I know what it is. She said, yes, you cannot criticize the power of the Communist Party. That's it. So don't do that overseas either. And then subsequently, came the offer, would you like to see some articles that I read to stay in touch with what's going on in China? Because now, of course, you're in Berlin, you're overseas, how can you possibly stay in touch? You must feel you're falling out of touch. And here's a USB cable I can give to you, where I have preloaded some of my favorite articles from the recent week. And I said, well, thank you very much. It's a small example. It wasn't a particularly frightening example for me. There are much worse ones, I know that. But it does illustrate something. I think there's an experience for very many people now living outside of China, people who have long experience, intimate contact or interests with China. So, how are we going to deal with this growing system? You will all know about United Front work, the United Front system, this attitude of how to spread revolution. Essentially, it means how do you identify people, you sort them into three categories. There are those who are friendly, there are those who are on the fence but can be won over, they're okay too. And then you isolate the third category, who are the enemies. They must be destroyed. Now, this is a thinking, the United Front work is all party work. All aspects and sections and parts of the party have to do United Front work. And then there's the whole bureaucracy of the United Front. Most recently, some of you will have seen the reports about police stations spreading around the world. Now, these are set up by various aspects of the Communist Party's United Front system. The United Front Work Department is, of course, one of 4 departments directly under the Central Committee of the Communist Party. The propaganda department is another one. Why? It's a question, why are our societies tolerating the existence of such of police stations, to put it in bunny ears, to euphemize it? Why are we tolerating them in our midst? We have sovereignty here. Democratic countries and systems have sovereignty over their own states, and yet we're kind of just not really taking it seriously. I find this extraordinary, really extraordinary, and I think somehow we need to connect and communicate to the people who run our societies, whose overwhelming focus is firstly on themselves and on their own societies, on, say, European systems or North American local concerns, and second of all, on the economy and, a lot of trade with China. How do we communicate the sense that you do need to protect your own society because it is vulnerable? It is absolutely vulnerable. It's a serious issue, and we have to do this. As The party projects its power abroad, as I believe it is doing through a variety of ways, trade, diplomacy for sure, grassroots organizations, a whole bunch of stuff. This problem is only going to get bigger unless we actually step in and stop it. So that's just a short word about, I don't ascribe to the idea of reds under the beds, but we do have an issue with the Communist Party of China in our midst, and we do need to face it and deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didi. You focus on this infiltration through the CCP, and we all know this 千人计划, this 1,000 specialist project launched by the Chinese government. They send out their students, scholars to foreign countries, and all the fields, the scientific fields, economic fields, cultural fields, in Western, just like an open book. All the Chinese can look at it and just participate in the research work. That's why China goes the development in rocketing, and they are nowadays, even in the high tech, they are leading in the world. And but the American, and you mentioned also Canada and other countries, they have noticed that since quite a long time. But in Europe, the people are really, old Europe, they are really sleeping till maybe the recent couple of years. What do you think? We haven't done enough, right, in this case?
I mean, my own theory about this is that Europe is suffering from something which I call late Orientalism, which is that these old habits of thought rooted in colonial pasts, which was called Orientalism, was a famous intellectual phase and way of seeing the world in Europe, that is somehow carrying on today through a sheer lack of understanding, interest, if you like, and above all, a kind of a hidden sense of, well, what could China ever do to us anyway? You know, what can they do? We're so great, we're so strong, we're so fine. No, now people here know that's not true. People are very self-critical in Europe too. I know that's the case. But there's this lingering sense of not taking the whole thing seriously. And to me, this is a really fatal error. I think we do need to take it seriously.
I have an old, arrogant European attitude.
And if I may add, also an overcompensation. And then you have the left wing in Europe, which I believe is very troubled in the sense that it overcompensates by saying, oh yeah, but look, you know, Communist Party is fine. And you get these very kind of like rigid left-wing attitudes, and to the point where people they have colonial guilt, perhaps a little bit, but that's a bit old-fashioned too. I don't want to dwell on this stuff, but they really are afraid of saying, yes, we are being infiltrated. What is this group here which takes Chinese officials and then pressures its environment, overseas Chinese in the environment, if they're students or business people or entrepreneurs or whatever, organizes them in Germany, for example, for what? To further the aims of the Communist Party in economics and politics. People won't say, who are you? What are you? Why are you doing this? Because they're afraid of being accused of being a racist, for example. And this is the left-wing fear, yeah, of being anti-communist, of being called a racist. And I can understand this fear because these are serious accusations. Being racist is a serious accusation. Anti-communist one could, just debate. So I think that's the point. It's this left-wing fear of being somehow politically incorrect is also very much hobbling us.
Thank you very much. Well, I can talk to you hours, but our next speaker, David Misas, is from the Tibet Initiative. I'm really happy that such a young guy, very intelligent, very devoted, and you join our work in human rights issues, Tibet issues, and many others. Now you are talking to us about a very special topic, colonial boarding schools in Tibet. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for having me and these very nice words at the beginning before I even said anything. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm going to talk about one very particular issue that we at Tibet Initiative have been working on in the past weeks and months, which are colonial boarding schools in Tibet. And this is a strategy by China to eradicate Tibetan identity from the very beginning, from a very early age. There are numbers by one US organization that approximately 800,000 Tibetan children between 6 and 18 years are living in colonial boarding schools at the moment. And that means that 78% of Tibetan students are in these schools between 6 and 18. And for 4 and 5-year-old children, we don't have exact numbers, but also there probably are a few hundreds of thousands in these boarding schools. These schools specifically target Tibetans and other so-called ethnic minorities. If you compare it with the rate of Chinese students in boarding schools, that rate is dramatically lower. This whole boarding school system was implemented as part of China's school consolidation policy at the beginning of the millennium. Many rural schools all over China were closed down and merged into boarding schools. And then in 2012, in other areas in China, these boarding schools were closed and rural schools came back, but not so in the minority regions. In 2015, the State Council called for strengthening boarding school construction to realize the long-term stability of the country. So the result was, as I said, that in Tibetan areas, much more children are sent to boarding schools. If you look at whole China, only 14.1% of rural elementary children are boarding in boarding schools, and in the TAR, the Tibetan Autonomous Region, almost 80% of elementary school children are in boarding schools. These are numbers from 2018. The risk of these schools is that the children are losing their mother tongue and their connection to their cultural identity. As the classes in these schools are in Chinese and they live apart from families and culture. The State Council is also very clear about these schools. In 2018, it said, or it called for actively carrying out educational and teaching activities in boarding schools that are conducive to promoting ethnic unity and integration, and guide students to widely use the national language, meaning Chinese, in school life and learning. Then, in 2021, the National People's Congress ruled that local regulations permitting schools to use minority languages are incompatible with the Chinese constitution. The same year, the Minister of Education ordered that all ethnic and rural kindergartens must operate in Mandarin by fall 2021. So all these regulations are also supported by witness statements from Tibet, and I would like to quote one elementary school teacher on this. Quote, "In my area, it is mandatory to send children aged 4 and above to boarding schools. Usually there are very few Tibetan teachers, the majority are Chinese. So teachers only speak in Mandarin and conduct old school curriculum in Mandarin, including nursery rhymes and bedtime stories. When they join primary school at age 7, hardly any of them can speak Tibetan." So we see that there's a generation growing up that really forgets their own language. And this is also because parents have no choice. They are compelled to send their children to boarding schools because there is a lack of alternatives, because all of the other schools were closed down. And that, in addition to that, there are intimidation and threats that are used to coerce reluctant parents to send their children to such schools. So police officers are coming to villages and threatening parents, fines are imposed to parents, so that in the end, children have to go to these schools. The results of the boarding schools are emotional and psychological distress, including extreme feelings of loneliness and isolation. There was a survey by a Tibetan researcher in 2016 where they interviewed youth attending rural boarding schools in Yunnan, and they found that more than 1 in 3 children were experiencing high levels of alienation. They found that Tibetan children developed an inability to connect in a meaningful way with others. Why is that? In these schools, we have individual accounts of sexual harassment, bullying, making students to reject their own roots, and contact to family is heavily restricted. In Sichuan, Chinese researchers documented that due to distance and difficult travel, as many as 80% of Tibetan children do not return home during the school year, even for holidays. And also phone calls are regulated. In some schools, only a few minutes per day are allowed to call home. In other schools, children have to give away their cell phones. There is another study by another Chinese researcher as well on the TRA boarding schools, where this researcher recalls scenes where parents are attempting to visit their children in Lhasa, the boarding school in Lhasa. The parents are shut out of the school grounds and they try to meet their children at a fence at the border of the school, but they are not allowed to go in. They are trying to give their children some treats or their necessities, but this was discouraged by teachers who told the children that they would lose academic points if they went to the fence to meet their parents. So I want to end with two quotes of this researcher who did this study in the school in Lhasa. Quote 1, "A girl in the 4th grade told me her parents did not come. I asked her if she wanted her parents to come. She replied that she didn't want them to come. She told her parents not to come to school because points would be deducted if they came to school. She asked, if the points were not deducted, would you want them to come? She nodded while carrying on cleaning." And quote 2, "I saw a little boy from 2nd grade talking to a parent across the fence, looking back while talking, frowning, worried that the teacher on duty would catch him and deduct points. The students hurriedly took things from the parents and ran back. The expression on the little boy's face indicated that he wanted to cry." So these are the stories that are happening in Tibet, and this is why we believe that these colonial boarding schools have to be shut down immediately to prevent that Tibetan identity is even eradicated further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David, would you agree that if we call this is a part of the so-called cultural genocide? Well, this word genocide is very strong, but we are talking about 文化种族绝灭. That happens in Tibet, happens in South Mongolia or in Xinjiang and so on. Do you know that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is the strategy of the CCP to basically take away people's identity, so that then from the very young age, Tibetans, Uyghurs, Inner Mongolians are somehow brainwashed to think that they are Chinese, and Chinese, what they are taught by the CCP is that Chinese means supporting the CCP. So this obviously is the goal in Tibet, but all the other regions as well, to eradicate the identity, and with this also any kind of resistance against the regime.
Thank you very much. I see that our friends Marie Holtzman, Hou Zhiming in France, in Paris, and Wang Guanru in London, Changpi in Düsseldorf, they are all online, and one, yes. And now I'm really happy that they join us here in the conference in another way. And our next speaker will be Wang Anna, Wang Ruiqing. She is the head of the IPK Media based in Washington, D.C. And we have to say our thank you very much to Wang Anna, because she and her staff support us with all these technical things. Otherwise, we are not able to have this combined conference, Zoom and presents. 安娜，现在就请你发言。首先，我刚才已经说了，非常非常感谢光传媒一直这么多年来一直支持我们。像今天我们这个会议没有你们的支持，我们是没有办法开的。好，现在请你发言好吗 ？You have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you invited me today. I'm so glad to be here. So I just talking about minority in China. 所以我今天想跟大家探讨的一个话题就是中共70年统治在中国的民族冲突以及民族镇压过程当中汉族的角色。直接用汉语讲完，不需要翻译是吧？直接用汉语讲完是吧？
可以可以。
可以的，你就直接讲吧，你就一直讲完。
OK， 作为一个汉族，我对这个问题有着深刻的感受。1985年，我大学毕业，分配到青海民族学院。当时我一个同寝室的朋友，他毕业于中央民大，他是一个少数民族，他是个蒙古族。那么他就告诉我，在他们中央民大的时候，有他们同班同学是内蒙古人民党的子女，就讲到说，当时对内蒙古人民党的镇压的时候呢，就是因为他们抓人很多，也没有很多的这种比如手铐这种戒具，直接就拿着粗铁丝，就通过人的锁骨，就把这些一串一串人通过一个铁丝穿着锁骨就往这个监狱里头赶。那么他的这个同班同学呢的父亲就是这个被穿着锁骨的之一。我当时特别震惊，我觉得这个事情我为所未闻。那么从此以后呢，当然也是在民族院校，那么我就比较多的关注这个民族问题。那么可以说，中共的统治就从始至今一直贯穿着非常严重的这种民族压迫和种族迫害。那么无论回顾中共70年统治，那么从1956年开始，从1956年的这个西藏大起义，那么一直到1966年的内蒙古人民党，那么1975年的云南沙爹的回族起义，回族暴动吧所谓，那么到1989年的藏族314的起义，以及这个延续到现在的这个维吾尔的这种残暴的镇压。那么在这个过程当中呢，我有很多这样的朋友，我就会经常反思，就是说为什么短短的中共统治的70年，每一个时期都贯穿着一个大的民族的这种镇压，回族、蒙古族、藏族、维吾尔族，所有的北方的少数民族里头，重大组成的无一例外。这些问题呢，实际上就是在这个过程当中，对各个少数民族的镇压，应该讲是非常的残酷。内蒙古人民党的这种镇压呢，不亚于现在的维吾尔族的集中营。这个我非常理解习海明主席的愤怒。那么因为种种原因，对这个问题的关注是不够的。比如说云南的沙家事件，1975年，当时是邓小平指挥的这场屠杀，实际上呢，6000人的村庄，1500多人死亡，那么其中呢，儿童呢就占了1/5。所以这个呢，就是邓小平他不光是说6次屠杀，他对各个少数民族的屠杀从来不手软。那他不仅是这个6次的屠夫凶手，他是整个中国人民的凶手。那么在这个问题上呢，我就在反思，就是我们汉族在这个历次的民族屠杀过程当中，我们普通人的角色是什么？我们的态度，这个是什么？所以这个问题呢，当然也是比较敏感。我想也不会每一个人都会有相同的观点或者说同意我的观点。那么我想呢，这个必须看到一个事实，就是说中共这个政权最近呢，这个蓬佩奥国务卿他在哈德逊研究所有2期非常精彩的节目。那么他的第1期节目呢，就是说中共不代表中国人民。他的节目大概3分钟， 字字珠玑。他说这个中共不代表中国人民，而且中共是个刻白品，这个词儿用的特别精彩。那就是中共它本身它不是我们中华人民文明、中华文化的产物，它是一个苏俄的分支机构，它是个刻白品。但是我们非常遗憾的就是，中共的核心是汉族组成的。那么所以说，中共建立的政权，那么在这个过程当中，汉族的作用是很大的。那么翻过来讲，我们汉族对此的责任也是很大的。那么由于这个中共政权的建立，中国文化就在此就被割断。那么实际上，我们现在中国大陆人的文化已然不是中国文化，而是中共的党文化。那么在此呢，就是说10几亿中国人民，尤其是汉族，都是受到党文化的荼毒。所以我就在此呼吁，就是说，尤其是各界，包括我们这个欧洲各界，对中国基督教的这个关注，对中国基督教的传播，其实至关重要。只有基督教文化取代了中共的党文化，那么这样中国人民才有更多的反思，才有更多的约束和道德重建。那么这个我尤其想说的就是，现在中国大陆人不能说他是传统中国大陆中国人，不是经典意义上的中国人。所以现在说中国的文化全是党文化，这是我特别强调的一点。那么汉族在这个过程当中的扮的角色呢？那当然，我想我们今天在座的也多数都是汉族。那我们首先呢，就是说，这个中共这些同志最大的牺牲者是汉族。那么我这些就不要说我们正反呀、右派呀，就是大饥饿，一直到现在。那么现在20大之前说有100万人被囚禁，那我相信绝大多数都是汉族。所以呢，这个汉族在这个角色里头，我觉得非常悲哀。就是汉族首先是个受害者，是中共政权的受害者，但他同时也是这个对其他少数民族暴政的加害者。那么我们只有这个汉族在这个过程中反思，我们在这个历次对少数民族镇压中的角色，我们要反思，我们要悔过，然后在这个过程中我们要反省。同时，最重要的是要反抗，就是拒绝这个基层的平庸之恶，拒绝这个基层之恶。只有呢，就是说，大家只有结束中共暴政，就是各个民族中共之下，只有结束中共暴政，就中国才可能结束或者减免更多的灾难。如果中共暴政在的话，灾难始终无休止，而且只会上来越来越多的灾难。各位都看到，现在中国的灾难空前的，每天都每刻都发生。所以呢，我在此我非常感谢会议方邀请我参加这样的会议，我很荣幸。我们也很高兴有这样的机会会议服务，我们希望能够继续的进行长期的服务和合作。那么在此最后，我呼吁所有的汉族，我们要反思我们在这当中的角色。我们不能做中共的帮凶，我们要为各个民族的和睦相处，我们要为和平，要为中国民主宪政一起努力。谢谢大家。
非常感谢。非常感谢这个安娜，你的说的这个题目非常非常的重要。我现在简短的把它这个组合一下，说一下。I make a very short summary of what Anna has spoken. She said the 7 decades of under the control, under the government of the CCP, the conflict between different nationalities becomes severe and much severe. In the 50s, it was the conflict in Tibet. In the 60s, 66 is the massacre in the Mongolai. In the 70s, 76, killing the Muslims, and 89, the Tiananmen massacre. And then, no, not the Tiananmen, I'm sorry. 89, the March 14th, the massacre in Tibet. All this, and it goes so far that they even kill children. So, the Chinese Communist Party, they don't represent China, they don't represent the Chinese, they don't represent the Chinese culture. This party comes from the early Soviet Union. So it's how do you say a Fremdkörper, actually. And what kind of role does the Chinese people play in all this tragedy? She said, the Chinese people are victims, but they are also complicit. They are victims and they are perpetrators. They are complicit with this cruel government. So we have to come in terms with the past. Das ist Vergangenheitsbewältigung auf Deutsch. And we have to think about all the crimes has been committed in all the Han Chinese name. So that's, we have to really rethink what happened in the past. That's the main points of Anna Wang's speech. I think it's really very inspiring, and thank you so much, Anna Wang. 非常感谢你。对不起 I have to cut a little bit short of our coffee break. It was actually planned for 30 minutes, but maybe you will be also satisfied with 15 or even 20 minutes. So our last speaker is Mr. Huang Hua. He comes from London and he represents a democracy party in the Overseas Democracy Party. And so, thanks.
Thank you. 谢谢大家。I would like to make my speech in Mandarin because my member is watching. And but my topic is talking about using short way to promote freedom, democracy, and human rights to Chinese people in mainland China. I try my best speak some English, but Mandarin for me is better. 首先，我想谢谢这个廖女士潘永忠先生，谢谢。谢谢你们邀请我来参加这个重要的会议，因为我自从90年代初参加民运以来呢，很少走出英国。这是第二次出国，第一次出国是在2007年07年的时候去美国参加了一次会议。那今天这个会议呢，叫这个自由、民主、人权的保卫战。那我感觉这个会议呢组织得很好无论是主题还有会议工作，非常的精致。作为我一个做事情的人呢，我学到了很多东西。那我没有太多的话要说，我只是问我自己2个问题。在1989年6月4号，就是天安门大屠杀的时候，为什么中国军人能够在天安门广场执行上面的命令，就是他们开枪杀人不仅杀成年人，而且还杀了很多这个孩子，这是我的一个问题，这是我问自己的。还有第2个问题是，俄罗斯的这个独裁者普京他现在要威胁用核武器来打击这个乌克兰，甚至可能打击西方国家。那么我们怎么样才能够期望俄罗斯军人在最后一刻能够拒绝按下这个Ukraine button？ 怎么样才能做到呢？我经常在想这个问题，就是万一他真的，那我住在伦敦，他一颗导弹过来，不全部完了吗？那么最后的希望就寄托在他最后那个军人能够按下那个 button。
那么我的答案就是说呢，我们应该充分的使用我们的媒体来宣传普世价值，宣传人权啊。如果让每一个军人啊，他们都有一个人权的意识啊，那么我想这种事情可能最后能够避免，这是我们最后的选择。这可能涉及到全球的人类文明，这就是我的自己的想法。那么作为我自己呢，我是想，我们最近呢在建立一个短波电台的short wave station，那么我们呢想利用这个短波电台 short wave station to promote 这个 human rights， 但这个工作呢有点难度，因为英国离中国太远了啊，所以可能我们会建立某些基地在台湾啊或者南朝鲜这些地方。因为我是50后出生的，那么我以前在英能蒙古里啊，在内蒙古，我也我在那个内蒙古生产建设兵团，那是属于北京军区的，要算半个军人吧。我们那个时候，我才16岁，我就偷听电台，我们把被子蒙起来，因为那时候没有耳机，所以我们偷听电台。所以说呢，这个东西呢，在中国还是有很大的市场。所以很多人说呢，在互联网时代呢，短波电台的黄金时代已经过去了啊。但是我认为呢，它很多的重要功能是 Internet 就是它不能够取代的。比如说，第一，独裁政权它没有办法阻止它最多就是电波干扰，但是呢，它没有办法把它 stop， 没有办法把它阻止。第二个就是对那个听众呢的安全问题。我有一个客人。I have a client because I work in legal firm, immigration legal firm in London. I'm an advisor. All my clients is from China. One of my clients told me he stay at home, use the mobile phone, watch the Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And then one day, the police locked the door, then take him go to a police station for the interrogation, and ask him why you look at this, and make some comments. But my clients refused, say, no, I didn't do this. But then they showed all the evidence. When my clients sleep on the bed, he used the mobile phone, but the mobile phone, there's a camera, then the picture show all the picture in the room. So that means everything they monitor, even private life in China. So the firewall, even you can climb the firewall, but still will be targeted by the Chinese government. So that is quite dangerous for the Chinese people. And but shortwave, you cannot target it, and you cannot check it. This is the second， 就是安全性。那第三个呢，就是 shortwave 它有很多的特殊功能，就是比如说汶川大地震啊，什么突发事件，尤其是 the Chinese army, people allow the captain allow you to use radio but not mobile phone, because mobile phone will focus your location. 这就是我想的，我们要使用一切的手段，向中国人民去宣传这个自由、民主和人权。如果大家都了解这些事情，都理解了这些，那么我说少数民族也好，将来再发生一个什么突发事件，像现在伊朗的问题啊，都可能在最后的一刻啊，中国人民会拒绝它。这是我的一个想法。那么我说我还要说英语嘛，我就不说了吧，我就只能说这个吧，好不好？
这个不能用是不是？
我不用了，其实这个声音。
音够大了。Just very short summary. Mr. Huanghua is planning to set up a shortwave broadcast station. And just to confront with the Chinese propaganda. But first, he has two questions. First, when he when he think back to 1989 to the June 4th massacre. His question is, how can the Chinese soldier follow the order and shoot his own people, shoot his neighbors, shoot all the citizens? How could that happen? Second question, Putin threat our world with nuclear threat. Will his soldier follow his order or not? So it's important to educate these people through media, and that they will understand or accept the universal value. If they do that, they won't follow this kind of cruel order. And shortwave has lots of profit, and the firewall or so what cannot stop it, but it is also a question of safety. If the people try to hear the shortwave, actually they cannot be detected. And when he was young, as a young student, he used to hear the enemy broadcasting, and that was in the 60s or 70s. Is very dangerous in China. So shortwave, to use shortwave, the specialty of shortwave to confront the propaganda of a dictatorial regime. That's very important. So sorry, very shortly to summarize that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm very sorry that we cut really 15 minutes of your coffee break, but you are welcome to have coffee and tea and some snacks. We will start at 4 o'clock. So 15 minutes break. Thank you very much.
你是什么人？要来抗拒。
我问你一句话，
Bist du bereit, nachher wir alle letzte diese Konsensus einmal vorlesen? Bist du bereit, das zu lesen? Ja, das ist jetzt schon 16 Uhr.
Ich weiß, das ist das Problem. Der frühere Präsident von der Republik, der hat öffentlich
Yeah, sorry.
Also, ich nehme es einfach mit, aber man kann ihn doch他已经跟我结算，我刚刚跟他讲过，那以后要跟我早说，你要在家里吃，无所谓的，我们要支付，就是你以后有这个机会，这样是你喜欢的。所以每一次开会我们都会叫你，好吗？你早点跟我说，看看。
老潘，我告诉你啊，现场传就是 live。
等会儿
啊，
我先那个跟张伟哥说。好的，同意了，就按照你说的两桌，好吗？我们。